Sometimes it's like we live is so unfair. I wanted to take you with me, but I did not dare. You were just a young girl, and I couldn't pay your fare. I left you sure wishes to.
That's right. You're listening to the mellifluous tones of Jim Pepper. Any of you know who Jim Pepper was? Jim Pepper was an amazing saxophonist from Oregon who is indigenous and really pioneered some fantastic confluence between jazz and native song, things that I think are illegal now. But I want to thank Dave for putting that on. It's really wonderful to hear his music. I've played music with a lot of folks who worked with him, and because we are in the Native American Student and Community Center, it's kind of cool. Anyway, welcome back. Wish I had some good news about the world, but that's why we're here. I always want to do the Dr. Pangloss thing and talk about the best of all possible worlds, but we're doing our darndest. If you're new today, I'm Tim DeRoche, Director of Programs for WorldOregon. This is Great Decisions, one of the fantastic programs that we do year in, year out, every year since about 1953. I wasn't here when it started, but I've been doing it for 15 years. Some things I want to announce before we get off and running. We are doing some really great programs coming up. I've just put up online a few of them. We have General David Petraeus speaking March 7th at the Old Church. That will be a very interesting conversation on the evolution of war and conflict from 1945 to the time called now. We also have Edward Wong, who is the New York Times diplomacy correspondent. This is his book, At the Edge of Empire. It is a fantastic piece of writing. It is both a family memoir on his family's trajectory from Mao-era China to the U.S. And before Edward was the diplomacy correspondent, he was the Beijing correspondent. And he's going to be here March 12th. We will be doing that at the Oregon Historical Society. And this is also going to be the subject of one of our global reads in March. The other event that I just put up is global reads for February. I feel like we need something a little bit lighter. So this is a wonderful book about the history of women at the CIA. I know it sounds like it's about DEI, but it's a fantastic book. In fact, Liza Mundy, who wrote this, also wrote Code Girls about women code breakers. And this is available in paperback. If you want to attend the global reads, we're doing them in our office. They're Saturday afternoons, cookies and coffee. And if you get your books through Broadway Books, they will give you a little bit of a discount, which is nice. They are really wonderful friends to work with. Another program coming up in April, which we have not entirely confirmed yet, is with Jill Doherty, who was the former Moscow bureau chief for CNN, who will be here, courtesy of my friends at the Kennan Institute. And she is fantastic. I heard her do a program in DC a couple of years ago with Fiona Hill and Masha Jovanovic, both of whom we've presented, and it was really, really good. And her book that is coming out is called My Kremlin. So that should be very interesting. What else is going on? We have up on the table, we've got Bridge Together. Grab a card. It's our fundraiser at the end of April. Speaking of China, we will have Nick Kristof joining us to say a couple words at that event. He has a long, long history with the organization. His parents were members, and he has spoken for us, I don't know how many times, and he's a really good Joe. If you haven't got your Great Decisions book, right here, right there, $35 for you from Good Family today only. And reminder that we are streaming this. So when we get to Q&A, it's great if your questions are on the mic and that they're questions, which is 30 seconds or less with a question mark. And I want to say that Great Decisions is made possible in part with the generous support of Leslie Brunker in her mother's honor, with additional support from longtime members David Margulies and Bill and Tina Brown. Thank you. Portland State University, where we are, is located in the heart of downtown Portland, Oregon, in Multnomah County. We honor the indigenous people whose traditional and ancestral homelands we stand on. The Multnomah, the Cathalet, Clackamas, Tumwater, Watlala bands of the Chinook, the Tualatin Kaliapuya, and many other indigenous nations of the Columbia River. It is important to acknowledge the ancestors of this place and to recognize that we are here because of the sacrifices forced upon them. In remembering these communities, we honor their legacy, their lives, and their descendants. And I am also very grateful to Portland State University's Office of Global Engagement and Innovation for being a phenomenal partner in presenting this series. So today we have a great topic. It could either be a haiku or it could be a very, very long discussion, depending on how we get into it. Dr. Jane Cramer is assistant professor at the Department of Political Science at the University of Oregon. She received her PhD from MIT in Security Studies and International Relations and her BA from Oberlin College. Many of my best friends went to Oberlin. She researches and teaches about international relations, American foreign policy, and international security. Her current main research has been about the causes of state overestimations of threats, i.e., national security panics. She has found that the main source of large public fears is intentional threat inflation, as opposed to intelligence failures or caused by the result of psychological biases. So this will be a really good way to look at the crossroads that we are standing at and American foreign policy. So big hand for Jane.
Hello, good afternoon. Nice to be here. Always fun to come to Portland from the U of O. Yeah, so I've been teaching at the U of O since 2000, almost 25 years. So I'm an associate professor, but I sent the wrong bio probably. But anyway, we're going to talk about this topic that was picked for us by the great John Eikenberry. He's a leading international relations scholar, which is what I do, but I'm going to explain that I do something a little different. He's at Princeton. He has basically made famous the liberal international order view of the world, which is brilliant, and I admire it completely. He has been writing for over a decade. He's written many books on it and what's going on with it and how fabulous it is. So I'm going to explain it to you so that we're all on the same page. And he's been writing, it's been in crisis for a long time. But when I was reading, and I teach about him because in my world of international relations, there are two main theories, many other theories, but I'm just going to mention two, is liberalism and realism. Okay, liberalism is the idea that internationally states can do better than realism. And realism is the idea that there's a balance of power, might makes right. There are no really meaningful international laws, okay, that it's all what great powers want. And it's how President Trump is behaving, right? We're big, we can take Greenland, we could take Panama, blah, blah, right? We could, turn Gaza into a vacation resort, right? Because we're big, right? That's the idea underlying realism. That is not modern realism. And, but it is a piece of realism. It's traditional realism, called today offensive realism, but the bulk of realists today are what we call defensive realists. And I'm going to spend a bit of time telling you that because I went to grad school at MIT, and at Harvard are a whole bunch of liberal internationalists. And at MIT with the security studies program, I specialize in international security, there's a bunch of defensive realists. I'm a defensive realist, but I'm also a liberal. I love the liberal international order. Got it? So it's not like you can't be both, and you can be, but I'm going to explain those differences to you so that you can see what the debate he's really talking about here, okay? And all of this feels completely ridiculous and otherworldly at this moment, but I feel almost certain it's still relevant. We'll see. Realism's always relevant. We'll see. I think John Eikenberry's right that liberal internationalism has a lot of staying power because people want it. They have wanted it for hundreds of years, so it's sticky. It's like people thought, so the European Union is the quintessential liberal internationalist order where you have a whole bunch of sovereign states, Germany and France primarily, that fought each other twice in 2 world wars, and then decided that if they came together and didn't balance a power thing in Europe, instead held each other close in a rules-based system through free trade, they could overcome nationalism and hatred and actually cause peace, okay? So that's what a liberal international order is. It's the European Union, but broadly, the US leads it globally in a slightly different way. So anyway, people who study the liberal international order like Eikenberry are in love with it because it has caused peace. It is peace causing. It is wild to think that the French and the Germans once hated each other as much as Israel and Hamas, right? I mean, it's absolutely that serious, and that's gone. They share a currency with no nationalist identity on it. It's all European nationalism. They overcame their nationalism through better textbooks and stopped patriotic teaching on purpose. And so it's a conscious order to be peace-causing that causes prosperity. I am in love with it, but I'm still going to show you that the people who look at this are missing a big piece, okay? What Eikenberry argues in this brief thing, but if you read Foreign Affairs, you see him all the time, and maybe have read his books. I teach from this one this term. They're all good to grad students. Anyway, he's arguing the 80-year consensus is over. He has a kind of bizarre 3 crises, 3 worlds, and 3 strategic options. If you read it, a little tedious, I think. I'm going to focus on the strategic debate. I will discuss the crises, but I'm going to say I don't like his framing of the crises, and I'm going to show you my framing. And then we're going to discuss the strategic debate, and I'm going to show you what I think he's missing. And it's a very important thing. And anyway, hang on. So this is just for background. This is the virtues of the liberal order. Through creating economic free trade and dependence, states come to share an identity. That's what we talk about in international relations. And through eventually sharing an identity, they insist on peace with each other. Okay, they want peace with each other. And that's a very cool thing. It grows almost naturally, but not naturally. You consciously, the bureaucrats in Europe had to consciously say no nationalism. We share the same history, we share the same textbooks, and we are European more than German or French. Okay, so you share an identity, but it grows for basically functional reasons because it's useful to increase prosperity. You do free trade. And then to make that work, you share rules and you share values of mutual respect and human rights. That's the liberalism. This is John Lockean liberalism, just to be clear. It's libertarian liberalism as well as progressive liberalism. It's not American liberalism. Anyway, to make the economic work, you have to integrate politically and somewhat militarily because you're trying to cause peace to allow trade, okay? And then there's other cooperations that deepen it, which is respect for human rights and other rules things, okay? And to do that, globally, the US has ushered in as the hegemon since World War II, more and more international organizations. The UN has gotten stronger and more useful. It does lots of things. If you don't know about it, it's the great silent unifier. The World Trade Organization after the GATT was a huge project of the US. We're now abandoning it. And there's tons of other international organizations, huge growth since World War II. And that's the liberal international order he's talking about. And it has been unbelievably useful for causing peace and prosperity. The world has seen nothing like it in the history of the world. It's beautiful. Okay. Now, here's where I am going to improve on Eikenberry, okay? He has 3 crises. He has an alleged geopolitics crisis, which is the return of great power politics. He says that will always make things unstable or something because great powers rise and fall. Sort of. I'm going to fix that one. Modernity. he says, this is his catch-all one. Oh, there's way more interdependence and technology is disruptive, climate change, tons of things. He has everything in there. Not useful in my mind. Liberal democracy, yes, breaking down, but why? Okay. He has, and he would agree with me, within his crises, key points. And I've seen in his writing that he does agree with me. Climate change is unbelievably destabilizing. It causes lots of distrust and stress and chaos and fear already. And so people are demoralized by it. And he would agree, all international relations, IR scholars is what we call them, teach that as the #1 problem in the world. There's just no comparison. The world knows it. Anybody denying it is from Mars. Anyway, but the crisis for liberal internationalism has been caused by what we call hyperglobalization. He mentions it, but he doesn't put it forward as the cause of the crisis. It is the cause, and we know it. Hyperglobalization has led to rising inequality. Rising inequality means the rich are getting richer and the poor are staying the same or poorer. And that leads to populism. It's basically automatic, and I'm going to talk to you about that. Populism is basically a revolt against the system by the mass of the people, okay? And it can take many forms, and the form that's most scary for internationalism is xenophobic nationalism. That's a very common one. We're going to talk about that. The other crisis that he does not point to, because he's an economist more than a security scholar, is that he doesn't notice the problems caused by US militarism. If you're a security scholar in the US today, most of them agree that the US militarism, the US military does a number of good things, and I'm not going to deny that. It's causing peace, but it's also causing problems, and there are ways to fix that, and that's what I'm going to explain. So US militarism, as it has been emerging, and I'm going to talk to you about this, is provoking China now. It has a choice not to. We can be mutually secure, or we can start an arms race that turns China into an enemy. And I'm going to talk to you about how we're turning China into an enemy, and they don't want us to, but we're doing it anyhow. And this is, in my opinion, the least understood factor in the crisis. And that's why I'm going to show it to you today, because Eikenberry doesn't even mention it. But in my world, it's everything. This is the problem. We could get along with China if we weren't doing this. And we are doing it for very predictable reasons. In fact, I'm teaching a class right now called The Causes and Prevention of War, which we look a lot at all the great wars, but we look at World War I, and the parallels are stunning. The militarism in Germany looks like the militarism here. And we talk about how militaries choose offensive doctrines, and offensive doctrines cause problems. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about. If you have a choice, you don't do that. But militaries left alone do that. And ours is so large that it can do it without the permission of the president. So first, I'm going to talk to you about populism, which is really interesting. Populism is almost automatic when you have charts like this, where the rich have gotten super rich and the poor have stayed flat. The cycles of it are wild. So we are in the cycle that was similar to after the Gilded Age of the 1890s, 1900s, where we had to reset. And ultimately, we reset our economy and built a middle class under FDR, right? I'm sure people know about this, right? So you can reset hyperglobalization, where you go free trade, free trade, free trade, but then you get inequality of wealth. You could maintain more equality through taxes, obviously. Taxes is how you do it, and economists know that. But if you don't do that, you will get concentrations of capitalism, just like the Monopoly game. Got it? If you play Monopoly harshly and are not nice, you will win. But if you are nice, you will lose. And that's what happens, okay? So populism takes two forms, and it's happening on the left and the right. You can take a reset like FDR, where you propose to tax people and provide a better safety net, which is what Europe did after World War II and does with the EU. Or you can take take the form of a populist on the right, which usually protects oligarchs, like under Kaiser Wilhelm, and protects oligarchs and basically does xenophobic nationalism, hatred nationalism, which is the enemy of liberal internationalism, okay? It's the oldest playbook. We have seen it over and over, as I'm sure you know, but you have two choices. You have to do that or that. The big mistake, in my opinion, of the Democratic Party was to not do a major reset. If they had done a major reset, they would have won the populist game. The big fat middle would vote for either of those. They just wouldn't vote for the middle, the centrist view, because they want a reset. They're desperate for a reset. So this is the known story. Many people talk about this. I'm happy to discuss it much further, but I'm going to show you the less known story. The less known story, because it's a stealth story. It's a story of bipartisan support for everything the military asks for. That's why when you have Elon Musk doing a Doge for government efficiency, he attacks the women and children programs and not the military, because everybody supports the military. Got it? That's why the US has the largest budget, not just in the world, but of all time, anywhere, all the time. We are the largest military power the world has ever seen. We are spending only for a top line budget, $877 billion. Real costs are way more than that, right? Nuclear weapons, a lot of the costs are in the Energy Department, not in that budget, not in the Pentagon. A lot, veterans benefits are not in there. Interest on that money is not in there. So real costs for military costs is about 1.3 trillion a year, okay? This is just the top line Pentagon budget, okay? That's not the full cost. Social costs for veterans, meaning if you're a caregiver taking care of somebody who is injured in a war, many of us, I'm a caregiver for a kid with a major disability, so I know how you do a lot of unpaid labor, and that's lost economic costs, and those costs make that cost way higher when you have wars that cause a lot of damage. Anyway, but just for comparison purposes, the US spends more than the next 10 countries. Just so you can see what that is in real numbers, not, this is last year's, but similar, 850 versus 230 billion a year for China. Got it? So China's nowhere near us, and they just recently passed 100 billion, like 5 years ago. So this is all brand new to them. We've been doing this for decades, and anybody who's older and already owns their home knows they're not still paying a mortgage, right? If you keep getting that income, and you've already bought all the stuff you need, you can actually go on vacation, right? This is not true early on. There's no vacation money. I don't know if you get what I'm saying, but if you have a budget of 850 billion for decades, you've bought a lot of stuff, it's accumulated, and now you can just waste a bunch of it, right? Which is what we're doing a lot of the time, and I'll show you some. But so China's 231 billion, Russia's surged to 140. Most is since the Cold War, it was down at 60 and 70 billion. It's just because the Ukraine war is giving all it's got to 140. India, 74, Germany, 73. All the rest of these are US allies, right? So we're golden in terms of security. We got a lot of allies. We have the most in the world, and we don't need to spend anything like that because we were already secure, right? Why are we secure? Because we have nuclear weapons and ocean moats. We don't even need a large military. It gets us into trouble. So this is what gets us to the talk of the strategies Eikenberry put out there. So he, like me, would say, all right, now we have an America First strategy. It's something about pulling back from leadership. It's something about not liking our allies. Couldn't tell you. Okay, that's what he said. I agree. Don't know what that looks like. It looks like it's taking Greenland, which I did not see coming. Not sure about that. But what Eikenberry riffs on, which is terrific, is that we got a liberal international order from US leadership. hegemonic leadership, powerful leadership that provided lots of things to the world since World War II. It provided economic, political, and security cooperation, okay? Free trade cooperation. It got people to cooperate. It got people to coordinate politically. It created NATO, and it organized cooperation between a lot of countries, okay? Eikenberry argues for the order to survive, it must provide the security and operate markets and foster political transitions toward liberal democracy. I agree it has to provide deterrence, providing the security he's calling for, which is where I'm going to take issue, and I'm going to talk about that. The US has done it through alliances, partnerships, institutional commitments that enhance its leadership and make it effective through legitimacy, which makes it durable, which is true. If you lead as a legitimate leader, people actually have an empire by invitation at the core. It's a true empire further out. It's by coercion. And so that's why the South, as he calls it, don't like us very much. And he admits it's an imperial empire further out, overthrowing governments and telling them what to do. But with our main partners in Europe, it's by invitation. Realists at the end of the Cold War predicted Europe would break away from us and balance us, because that's how realism should work. Did not happen. We grew tighter. Why? Because we're enjoying prosperity and peace together. They welcomed us. They tried to keep us on track in terms of keeping the order in place. So what Eikenberry argues is, he says, to keep this order, which is incredibly valuable for our peace and prosperity, we have to do deep engagement through forward defense. This is necessary to sustain the order. This is where we're going to disagree. And he compares that with the group of scholars that he's labeling this strange name of grand strategy of Westphalian internationalism or progressive realism, because it is a heterogeneous group of a bunch of people, but it's led by people who have signed on with this guy. His name is Barry Posen, from where I went to school, MIT. And he and other defensive realists, have put together a new grand strategy called restraint for the US, which argues that you've got to do less in order to preserve the liberal international order. And that's what I'm going to explain. This is the part that Eikenberry disagrees, and I'm going to show you why he's wrong. So, deep engagers, which have a lot of ideas of what you should do. They support the 1,000 US bases overseas and all kinds of stuff. But in particular, they want to say, we must defend Ukraine and defend Taiwan because they're democracies, okay? This is tricky. My heart is with them, but I'm going to talk about the difficulties and the differences of those problems. But briefly, what does restraint argue? Restraint argues and uses the terms that Eikenberry used, that the US needs to stop giving itself self-inflicted wounds. We are destroying our own power by behaving illegitimately. And that's a problem. And he doesn't say why. He just says we got to cut it out. Like, oh, come on. But if you do a deep dive into what causes states to have irrational foreign policies, we notice in security studies that a very famous theory in the business school or among business is organization theory. Organizations do irrational things to enhance their size and wealth, okay? So for example, the most stunning one that everybody knows about is, why is the US doing nothing about climate change? We know the answers. At MIT, we thought, back when I went there 25 years ago, we knew the answer about climate change. All my science students said, of course we're going to fix it. We have the answer. And then we'd say, sorry, that's why you got to study politics, because not so simple. Why? If you have giant corporations, they want to keep making money. They want to enhance their size and wealth. The CEOs of fossil fuel companies know about climate change. In fact, they know about it so much they fix the books to pretend like they don't know. They have to change the record, okay? And we're showing that, but we know they know. They're not stupid. They weren't born yesterday, but their job and their billions depend upon it. So you do what you must. Similarly, in military organizations, it's stunning. Every military organization of a great power tries to build an offensive doctrine, even if defense is rational, because it enhances the size and wealth of the organization, okay? That is why before World War I, you had every great power building an offense when defense was dominant and it ended up in trenches in a couple weeks. They knew that. The military leader said it won't work, but when push came to shove, they used the doctrine they had on the shelf. When they had a crisis, they said, got to use what we know what to do. And they all lost. It was stupid. And we're all going to suffer climate change because our CEOs won't do better. And military leaders, when they retire, often spend the rest of their retirement trying to fight the organization they always said the right thing in, the wrong thing in for decades. You can see it over and over. At the end of the Cold War, all these strategic air command commanders came out of retirement and said, this was stupid. The Cold War was stupid. We shouldn't have done that. But they knew it all the way, but their career depended on it. Anyway, so if you study this, we say military organizations, when they get huge, want offense, and that's a problem. That's where our self-inflicted wounds come from. Because we have a giant hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if you look at, Eikenberry wants to say, we have to go promote democracy with our military around the world. Show me where that's helped. I teach entire classes of all US interventions. It has not helped except once. And I bet you can't guess where. It helped at the end of World War II. I take it back. In all the optional wars since World War II, okay? It helped in Japan and Germany, but that was not something we did optionally. We actually used our military, forget it. We'll go to do that in Q&A. Anyway, so realists say you got to avoid self-encirclement, like Germany before World War I. States will balance threats. If you get threatening, they will balance against you. You recognize that the USA is secure, that it has really close allies and they're secure. So do things like maintain the public goods, maintain deterrence, but don't build offensive doctrines that drag you into trouble, okay? So where does that leave Ukraine and Taiwan, okay? This is very much the issue today. It is argued that we have to defend Ukraine. And in my heart, this is the one exception to the rule I want to do. Why? Because it breaks the liberal principle that Putin invaded Ukraine, and we stand for a principle that borders can't be taken over. And Ukraine gave up their nukes peacefully on a sort of, not an agreement to defend them, but a semi-agreement that it would help the world order to have fewer nukes. And so we owe Ukraine because of that to some extent. Now, tons of realists like Barry Posen argue that we're in a grinding war of attrition in Ukraine, and we really can't win Ukraine without mobilizing and going over there. It's really high cost. We could do it, but it would be huge, and we're not gonna. So it's merciful to settle in Ukraine because taking and holding territory is rarely successful for great powers. It could be successful, you don't know. But if a settlement is reached, Ukraine could probably win in the long run, just because it will eventually be very costly if they keep resisting. It's expensive to hold, but we don't know. They could lose territory. This is a tough issue. I am not going to say I know the answer. Advocates of restraint are divided. They don't say never, but some say never, some don't. Anyway, I don't have an answer on that. But this one, the tougher and more problematic one, is actually easy. This one is wild, okay? Yes, Taiwan is a democracy. It is a democracy that we created on territory owned by China, right? So that's a problem. Taiwan was always part of China, and we made it our aircraft carrier when they had a civil war, and we decided to back the losing side that retreated to Taiwan. Now, China never accepted that, and that would be like Britain hanging on to Georgia in our Civil War, which is pretty iffy that we'd put up with it in the long run, right? Now, China was weak, so they had to suck it up then. But now they would, if we grew stronger and said, okay, Britain, give us back Georgia, we might give it back. I mean, they might give it back rather than fight. Got it? That's not actually the problem. Today, the need to defend Taiwan is unclear that we actually have to, okay? It has become a problem because it's the Pentagon's favorite mission to plan for. China did not want to violently take Taiwan. It looks like they might have wanted to because of Hong Kong, but Taiwan is actually a porcupine and wouldn't be simple for them to take. And Taiwan speaks Chinese, does most of their trade with China, and they were slowly basically winning China over in many ways and happy with Taiwan until we started stirring the pot. That's weird, but it's true. So they were super happy with the policy of strategic ambiguity. They don't look that way now, but 20 years ago when this trouble started, they were happy with it. We were happy with it. Most China scholars think we could still go back to it. Like they would like that. They would welcome some agreement of strategic ambiguity. That is, we don't officially really recognize Taiwan and we keep dealing with China, but they'll leave Taiwan alone and we won't claim Taiwan and we won't recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state, as we never have, right? Because we recognize that they're part of China. Anyway, the problem here is the US is intentionally provoking China over Taiwan. And that's what's making a rift between the US and China. Why would we do that? It's the only threat suitable to justify a massive defense budget, especially new massive spending on all new nuclear weapons. Okay, so I'll finish up quickly. I won't go into this so much. We needed a peer competitor in order to justify. We faced a turning point in our nuclear arsenal. All right. We faced a turning point in our nuclear arsenal where it was going to get outdated. I want to show you this one first, actually. And we either had to rebuild our submarines or dock them. Got it? They're coming to the end of their lifespan, and we could see this. And the industries and the people that had built us a giant triad during the Cold War were either going to be put completely out of business or they were going to get a whole new life. And they fought hard and they won. We are building an all new Cold War arsenal, a new, brand new, spanking new triad. And we started doing this before there was a peer competitor. That's how we know we started it, okay? So now that we're actually doing it, all countries, ever since the end of the Cold War, all countries were going down in nuclear weapons. We were leading the way in disarmament, and now they're all going up. See those little arrows? Everything's going up. The United Kingdom almost went unnuclear just for money because it thought it didn't need a sub. And then we forced it to buy one of our subs, basically. And so now it's going up, right? That helps subsidize our new subs. So now that China's going up because we're going up, India's going up because China's going up, because India's going up, Pakistan's going up. And anyway, North Korea's going up because we've been threatening them for a long time. And because we are going up, Russia's going up. We were all going down. We are now going up, and the US started it. Our plans are to rebuild everything, including the plutonium processing pits, everything. We're building all new nuclear weapons from scratch. Why? Did they go bad? No. No, they will last. They are fine. But it's really good to have to buy new ones, okay? They're perfectly good. They do not rot. Nuclear weapons can be life extended of hundreds of years. Got it? But we're building all new ones. Okay. We started this, provoking this arms race by leaving what was called the ABM Treaty. Kissinger actually brought about the ABM Treaty to turn the Cold War around. And that is, if you outlaw missile defenses, then you can build down in nukes. And I explained that in Q&A. But the second we left the ABM Treaty in 2001, when George Bush Jr. was first in office at Christmas after 9/11, he decides to leave because Senator Joe Biden at the time and Mikhail Gorbachev and a ton of other people said, now the arms race begins again. Okay. Why? You build defenses, they got to build over it. That's what China's doing. They're building up only since we started deploying missile defenses around them. We have been abandoning arms control. Most people don't know this, but we had a whole structure of arms control that got us out of the Cold War with the ABM Treaty to begin it, then SALT talks, then START talks. Very important was the INF Treaty because that controlled doctrine. Ronald Reagan negotiated getting rid of all war-fighting weapons and enshrining deterrence in the INF. Trump left the INF, and that's when arms control really crumbled. Our doctrines are out of the box. Got it? And we're doing it. We claim they're cheating. We hold the cards. We have this stuff, and we're the only ones playing this game. And they are countering us, but not building. They're not even close to us. So I will quickly finish up because I always talk plenty too long. Sorry. Anyway, the best strategy, the good news is the liberal international order would be strengthened by a strategy of restraint. Restraint would allow China not to balance against us. And China wants that. China scholars in the US want that. I want that. It's possible. That world is one China has begged for. We're the ones provoking it. It's up to us. We have all this power. The liberal international order should be preserved. It does not require deep engagement. We could save money and make the world a better place if we don't do overexpansion. We should stay strong. Peace through strength is real, but peace through strength through what the Europeans call defensive defense. Doctrines that don't go on the offense, and that's possible today. The liberal order promises free trade, a rule-based cooperation, and is threatened, as Eikenberry says, by a balance of power. What he doesn't recognize is deep engagement causes the balance of power, and we don't need it. Okay, so to avoid a new Cold War, the US has to adopt a strategy of restraint. Now, of course, this entire conversation, which has been going on for a while, because this has been happening for a while, is completely moot because of America First. We can talk. That's all. Thanks.
Great. So if you've got a question, I've got a mic. I can go around and hand it to you. I've got the mic, so I'm going to ask a question first. So in the post-war international rules-based order, a lot of our foreign policy behavior was predicated around this idea of what was called the domino theory. And I'm curious, in your circles, a big piece of that was investment in international institutions, in diplomacy, in US aid, sort of post-Marshall Plan aid. As we see USAID going through what it's going through, we see ourselves pulling back from the UN, from WHO. What do you see in terms of a different type of domino theory going forward? And what does that mean for traditional allies and traditional adversaries in this large picture?
Well, obviously, I'm of the mind that pulling out of the WHO and the UN is a bad idea. I think more cooperation is better. It helps the world. And all the things you can coordinate to end pandemics internationally before they get to our shores are amazing. You know, the UN does tons of things. It's brought together a thing called the International Panel on Climate Change of thousands of scientists to show us that climate change is real and what's going to happen and all that. Those are beautiful services. And in IR speak, we say it's providing transparency and a place to come talk. So to leave those things is really devastating to all of us. The domino theory thing, we call that a myth of empire because it doesn't work that way. So that's a different conversation. So I don't see dominoes falling, but I do see devastation rippling out from leaving cooperation. So.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
sure.
Thank you for the comparison to world events right before World War I. I kept thinking of the Schlieffen Plan, for example.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking of China versus US in their offensive postures. Which happened first? I mean, because obviously China has a very offensive attitude in the South China Sea. They're building.
They treat the South China Sea the way we treat Cuba. Yeah, there's no doubt that in their own backyard, they are, you know, we have a Gulf of America now. They have a South China Sea. So I'm not saying they're nice. This is not, great powers are cruel to their neighbors. They do things like tell Mexico to not send anybody across because everybody coming across is a criminal. Great powers are jerks, right? And China is a jerky great power. They do know in a pretty rational way that they don't want to mess with us. They have never built a military to mess with us. They have zero power projection capability beyond the South China Sea, which is very minimal. I actually have lots of charts about their military, but we can talk about that later, but they stink as a military power. They are focused on maintaining unity in their country. They spend their time being authoritarian to their own people and not being as imperialistic as we are. They're not as powerful yet. I'm not saying they won't be imperialistic, but they have worked very hard to not pick a fight with us because they're getting rich and happy with us. And they know it. And they know it. Actually, I saw a great talk by another scholar, China scholar, about how the cities know it. And they pursue a different policy with the permission of Beijing to keep trade open. And that's why when they respond to our bizarre tariffs that don't make, at least I don't understand why they make a ton of sense. I understand where they come from in your gut, but they don't make sense nationally. But they respond very carefully. And when everything we've done militarily, they've warned us for decades, don't deploy missile defense right around us, pretending it's at North Korea because we know it's at us and it's at us anyhow. And South Korea, that we imposed missile defense on South Korea to go against China. South Korea said, don't make us do this. That'll make China mad at us. And so China has tried to avoid this conflict with us. They do want to control the South China Sea. Yes, that's typical. It's typical behavior. They do want those sea lanes to stay open. They're the ones who would be hurt if they're closed. So they're not closing them. They're just claiming different mineral rights and fishing rights and telling people they're in charge, which is extremely typical. So, that's why restrainers say we should keep the oceans open. It's called offshore. We would provide the public good of an open ocean, but we wouldn't go and do Middle East wars, et cetera. So
there's a perception, I think, that's widely accepted in the US, at least, and maybe Europe, that China has grown economically through intellectual property theft, et cetera. How does one interleave economic power, politics, into military strategy, and do they feed between themselves?
So that's what I think there is, as China always says, the competition is economic, it's not military. And I agree. Yeah, we're going to compete with them. But what's really interesting is we have similar problems with people who are our friends, but we don't hear about it nearly as much. We spy on our own allies a lot, and they spy on us, and we have problems with them, and we take them to the WTO. We obviously have problems with Canada, right? But the China threat actually has a ton of hype behind it. And yes, they, as Japan actually stole intellectual property from us as a rising power forever, right? And it's a problem. That's always been true. People do it in our own country. Somebody invents something and somebody else takes it and makes it, makes a buck on it. It is a problem. You want rules to help with that, to make it worth making things. But on the other hand, we hype the China threat as if doing that is a military threat. It is not. They're not coming for us. They don't want to have this fight. And we can't make them stop that through the military stuff. So we have to do that on a different playing field.
Yes, I wonder if you could circle back a little bit to the beginning of your lecture, which started with the growing inequalities in Western economies and so on. And what I'm asking you to do is kind of square the circle a bit of relating the domestic politics to the international strategic type of politics.
Okay. Yeah.
In that, the liberal international order basically resulted in the global economy, the outsourcing of various, production long supply lines, and the idea that there was a global international capitalist class that was really not necessarily controlled by any sovereign entities or anything like that, and that's how we got into it. And so now we're getting this terrible right wing, America First stuff, but how do you try to preserve some of the good features of the liberal international order while solving the domestic political problems?
So I am not an expert on that. I do understand some, but I'm not going to say that that's what I study completely. But who studies it, where it's been done is in the EU. Okay. So if you're going to have international liberalism, what do they do in the EU? Capital can move, but so can workers, right? If workers could move, that's why the backlash of hyper globalization is often aimed at immigrants, because workers can't move and then their jobs get stolen. They can't go somewhere else to do it. And people know that that's a problem somehow in their gut. So it's an easy target, even though they didn't do it, right? It's the large corporations. So what Europe did to solve that was open borders fully, right? You can, so my colleague, Craig Parsons, who I heard did speak here, he does the European Union and he studies this a lot. And what's really interesting is their borders are way more open than we are within the US, right? So if you cut hair in Germany, you don't have to get recertified to cut hair in France. You do to move to California, to do fingernails, hair, plumbing, obviously, right? That's dangerous. So all kinds, a lawyer has to be in every state certified. Everybody has to be certified. Not true in Europe, right? Workers can move. And that's what openness is required. And then there's a social contract that you have to provide: education, healthcare, all these things. And that's what evens out the profits. We know from studying economics that they will concentrate. Capital breeds capital, right? And so the rich get richer, but you have to for them to maintain their whatever percent wealth that, what I think it was Eisenhower said, you had a huge tax rate on the top money, right? You still had capitalism and incentive, but you had to redistribute it to everybody to have a good functioning economy. So economists know that you have to set rules that help people in openness. Otherwise, they do lose their jobs, right? We did NAFTA, and we have a huge backlash over it because the rich in Mexico won, the rich in the US won, and the workers in both lost. That was wild, right? So Free trade done badly hurts all the people and only helps the rich. So you have to fix it, but it can be fixed. It's not a bad system. It's a fixable system. And we know that the rules have to change if people are going to, you get in efficiencies, greater efficiencies with larger markets. Every little European country needed that. They needed open borders to specialize, right? And so with open borders, you can have specialization, which gives us leisure time, free time. That's a beautiful model, but it has to benefit everybody or nobody's going to put up with it, because otherwise your job can go away and you can get messed up by capital can move, but workers can't is not fair to workers, right?
Middle Easterners and Africans moving in.
Yep, they've got populist problems too. We forced worse kind of capitalism on them over time. We've insisted on Wild West rules of capitalism. And so their social contract has eroded too. They used to have a very strong one. They would not make free trade agreements with non-democracies at first. They have to now, right? But they said, no, that's part of the whole liberal promise, is you can only do free trade with other countries that can unionize. Our free trade agreements prohibit minimum wages and unionization in most of all of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We lock them in with no minimum wage, no health care. And we say, you must compensate our corporations if you raise your wages. Not wild. It's corrupt. It's very corrupt.
At the beginning of your comments, you associated the Trump approach to Panama and Greenland and stuff as realism school. I think realism school would disagree with you on those approaches as being counterproductive.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you a question. You talk, and having studied with Eikenberry, he talks about the rules-based international order. And it's really a myth, isn't it? Because every time we don't like the rules, we've violated them.
Mm-hmm. That's a realist
Every
view.
major intervention from Vietnam on was a violation of international rules. When we support Israel, we're violating international rules.
Right.
So it's really American hegemony that we're talking about.
Wow.
And now the world, as the realists would say, are really combating that hegemony. And we have domestic problems in all of our internal politics, both in Europe and here, because people realize the rules-based international order was a redistribution of income and livelihoods up.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's the answer to that without looking at the domestic power equation of corporations and the politics within the various countries?
That's exactly what I said on this one. I think you have to address the inequality. That's the key to fixing it. I don't know how. That would be a Bernie Sanders kind of thing, an FDR kind of thing, right? That would be a reset. That would redistribute wealth. Biden did it some, but too quietly. Nobody understood him as a populist at all. He was somewhat of a populist, but this is a loud populist so that people can see that there's populism on the left and populism on the right. You are correct. The things you're saying about realism would say it's hegemony and that international institutions are a fiction. The reality is it's not fictitious that international cooperation through some kind of rules solve peace in Europe. The EU is not a fiction. Realists predicted it would go away and get worse. Brexit only made it stronger. It's facing crises, but nobody wants to do Brexit. No one's lining up to leave because it cost England money. And free trade pays, even for the locals. We're going to be sad that we sanction a lot of people. It's going to not be good. What we have to do to make it fair is fix the rules domestically, right? There's a lot of rules that have to be fixed, a ton of rules. It shouldn't be as what I call Wild West, meaning corporate-led, no vote for a democratic order would make it have a redistributed safety net. So I think you can look at it that it was American hegemony that brought it about, but the rules are sticky without us. If you do surveys all over the world, people think they have human rights. That's weird, right? That's sticky. That's a norm that has taken off. That's a fiction. They have no human rights unless we defend them, but they think they do. So there's something there because the world has changed. There were no human rights before Eleanor Roosevelt in World War II. So there's a lot of things that have grown up and changed. And human rights help lead to better civil rights, blah, blah, blah. Those are sticky. Those are real things that people want and they want more of, and they fight for them. It's hit and miss because collective action is much weaker than oligarchic action. So it takes time.
So we're coming up on time, but let me bring it back to the classroom. You're a college professor.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that everyone in this room has grown up with some assumed knowledge or presumed wisdom around norms. But your students, by and large, were born either right before or right after Obama was elected. So they have grown up through a pandemic, through a lot of shifts, without maybe an expectation of norms. So I'm curious, what are the conversations you're having in your classroom on these issues? And are you feeling any sense of hope about the next generation going into policy, politics, and public service? Or are we seeing a disheartened generation?
It's a mix for sure. I have wild conversations. It's very fun. Young people shock you, right? The most heartening thing is, I would say, I used to have to explain that climate change was real. They know it. They are worried. They want to fix it. They are desperate. So that's cool. That's a good thing. I do surveys of them. They all think they have human rights, that human rights are a duh, right? Like, yeah. They even believe, which I really like, I have 2 trans children, and they believe trans rights are real. They think trans people should have rights, gay people should have rights, everybody should have rights. And I'm like, yeah, that's the best, because then they will. If we all think, get the old people out of the way. Just the young people really think that's absolutely true. Like I have never had anybody say no to me, now, of course, I'm their professor, but we have wildly open conversations. And even people I would not think would say that come up and say, wow, of course, that's great. I'm glad you said that. Right. So those are very heartening. Quite a few want to fix politics. I have these activist children, and quite a few didn't even want to vote. And that's disheartening. And I kept saying, no, you don't understand. You lived through as long as I have. You are voting just to hang on here. Come on, you will vote. And I think my children voted, but boy, they would have not voted. And same with a lot of my students. This last election, they were bummed. They were mad over Gaza. And, even if they love Israel, they were mad over Gaza. I mean, really, it was, as many people probably realize. So that was a wild, game changer for them. Just like Black Lives Matter was a few years ago. That was stunning how once they started to see footage of cops shooting Black people all the time, they were like, oh my God. And they kept saying, we can't have a police force. I'm like, you need a police force. You got to have a police. Like, I know what anarchy is, man. You got to have a police force. But I agree that if the police were killing my kids, I would not want a police force. I would rather get my own gun. But anyway, those are the things I see. I see a lot of interesting stuff, but naivete about how the system works. And they need to, but they need to figure out they got to vote, and they got to actually mobilize to get the vote out, because that's what they did not do. They did not mobilize. They barely dragged themselves there, if they did it at all. So that was sad.
Well, let's have a big hand for Dr. Jane Cramer. So the slogan, "We are the ones we've been waiting for," is still viable.
I think they're great. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I hope so.
Thank you all. Hopefully we'll see you all next week. Next week is about U.S.-China relations. So it's another chapter of what we've been talking about today. So stay tuned. Oh, not next week. I'm sorry. We do not have a program next week. It is Oregon's birthday. It is Valentine's Day. Love your neighbor. And we'll see you the week after that.